And this is our agenda for today. So I'll be going through the background on the Tribal Capacity Building Pilot Program, the purpose of the RFQ, the proposer qualifications, some of the activities in our scope of work, criteria for evaluating the TA providers, proposer response packages, so the components that are needed within the proposal, and then ending with the question and answer. So next slide, please. All right, the Tribal Capacity Building Pilot Program is a new grant program that provides funding. Oh, sorry, before that, okay, it looks like Marky's recording, so thank you. So it's a new grant program that provides funding and technical assistance to California Native American tribes to build staff capacity to advance tribes' climate-related work. Administered by the Strategic Growth Council, the goal of the pilot program is to assist tribes in developing long-term capacity to secure funding and implement tribal-led climate solutions. So the pilot program will fund staff salaries and activities that include planning, securing funding for, and implementing projects related to climate mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. Tribal grants include 2-year grants of $150,000 to $250,000, and the technical assistance provider contract will result in a TA provider team that will support tribes throughout the grant term. Next slide. The TA provider team will offer tribes no-cost, flexible capacity building support and technical assistance services that will respond to each tribe's needs. So support could include things like trainings and workshops, grant application and management support, partnership building, peer learning, and staff and economic development. Next slide. All proposal activities in combination should make sure that they're achieving these 3 program objectives. The pilot program's key objectives are to 1, build tribal staff capacity to advance and sustain climate action, 2, secure funding to develop and implement tribal-led climate projects, and 3, enhance peer learning relationships among tribes. Next slide. So the TA provider team can anticipate working with 4 to 6 California Native American tribes that include federally recognized and non-federally recognized tribes that include rural and urban tribes working on a range of climate-related projects that address a range of climate impacts. Next slide, please. And to learn more about the Tribal Capacity Building Pilot Program, you can go onto our program webpage where there's a link to a fact sheet. There's also a link to our recently released Notice of Funding Availability, or NOFA, and our final grant guidelines. So I think in the chat, there will be a link to all of those. Next slide. Okay, so now I'll go over the request for quotes. So the solicitation is currently published online in the California State Contract Register. And to ensure that you receive any additional addenda, which we have posted addenda in the past few months to the solicitation, we do encourage parties to register online at Cal eProcure. And this solicitation will ultimately result in a local assistance contract. Next slide. So the purpose of this RFQ is to solicit a technical assistance provider team to support tribes participating in the Tribal Capacity Building Pilot Program. The TA team will work with the 4 to 6 tribal grantees for a 2-year grant period to evaluate capacity building needs to develop, amend, or update an action plan based on each tribe's SGC grant priorities and goals in relation to the tribe's previous climate change experiences and actions, which will vary from tribe to tribe. The goal of the TA team is to provide flexible support that will respond to each tribe's needs under this grant and advance tribes' climate-related work, as well as facilitate peer learning opportunities among the tribal grantees. All of this will be done with the goal of advancing the Tribal Capacity Building Pilot Program objectives mentioned earlier in this presentation. Next slide, please. So the proposer must be a nonprofit recognized by the IRS as a 501c3 exempt. Academic institutions, including University of California or California State Universities, are also eligible as long as they fulfill this criteria, or a tribal government in order to qualify to submit a proposal for the solicitation. Subcontractors can be any type of organization as long as the proposer's TA team meets the minimum qualifications specified in this RFQ. And as I mentioned earlier, this RFQ does encourage a team-based approach to technical assistance, with various entities collaborating to contribute specific subject matter expertise. So if the proposal consists of multiple providers, the team must identify an entity or an individual to serve as the project manager or the lead technical assistance provider. Next slide. Keeping in mind our program goals and objectives, the proposer must demonstrate that the collective experience of their team meets the minimum qualifications in the following areas, including existing relationships and significant experience working with California Native American tribes, and an ability and willingness to travel to meet with tribes in person as well. And there are also desired qualifications listed on page 5 of the request for quotes. Next slide, please. Members of the team must also demonstrate minimum technical knowledge and experience in the following areas, including California Native American tribal communities, history of and current practices in tribal governance, tribal laws, regulations, and policies at the state and federal levels, and integrating and protecting tribal data sovereignty and traditional ecological knowledge into work with tribes. There are also, once again, desired technical knowledge and experiences listed on page 6 of the RFQ. Next slide, please. So the proposer scope of work includes 4 tasks. The first task is assessing capacity building opportunities. This means the team will support each of the 4 to 6 participants in the pilot program in assessing needs and gaps and identifying priorities and objectives. The TA team will create or update an action plan with each tribe that will outline the tribe's capacity building plan and implementation strategy to achieve program objectives. Task 2 includes an implementation of action plans. So this will be assisting participants in implementing their action plans through things like trainings, grant application assistance, planning and implementation support, and other SGC approved activities that support program goals. The TA team will also organize peer learning opportunities among participants and will assist in communicating about the participants' participation in the program and creating case studies. Lastly, the TA team will also compile a best practices report and resource library consisting of lessons learned and outputs from the pilot program to support participants on their specific needs. And it'll also be a useful resource for state agency tribal program staff and all California Native American tribes outside of the pilot program as well. Task 3 includes coordination and communication with participants. So the TA team will be expected to communicate regularly with each of the tribal participants and track progress on their action plans. Activities can include things like conducting regular check-ins with the tribe to provide updates and progress checks, including a final evaluation survey at the end to gather anonymous feedback on the program experiences. And the last task is administration and coordination with the Strategic Growth Council. So the TA team will coordinate and connect participants with SGC and other state agency programs and activities throughout the 2-year grant term. So that includes weekly coordination calls with SGC staff, communicating with the SGC communication staff to create press releases, social media posts, and other communication materials. And also ends with quarterly reports and a final report at the end of the 2-year term. Next slide, please. So for this RFQ solicitation, there will be a technical score evaluation phase consisting of 100 possible points, and SGC will be convening a panel consisting of SGC staff to conduct an evaluation of the technical areas of the proposal. And the following is the technical scoring criteria for this project. So we have points available for clarity and organization of proposal, the approach to the scope of work, a work plan and schedule, budget justification, and the proposer and team experience as a whole. Next slide. And so now I'll go into the proposer response package. So this is just the required submission package components that are needed for a successful proposal. Next slide. So these are the main components you'll need to submit with your proposal, starting with a letter of commitment, filling out and making sure that all the requirements within the proposal checklist are included in your complete proposal, a response to the scope of work, qualifications and references, budget and cost details, and all the required attachments, which I'll be going into further along in the presentation. Next slide. So starting with the response to the scope of work, there is the summary. So the summary shouldn't be longer than 1 page. And this should be the place where you include a brief description of the proposed project, briefly summarizing the main points of the sections of your proposal, including the features and benefits of the proposal. We also have the project management plan, which is where the proposer should provide a plan, including the management structure of the team, including who the project manager will be. the methodology and approach to work should be where the proposer identifies specific techniques and methodologies that will be used in specific administrative and operational management expertise that will be employed in order to accomplish the tasks and deliverables in your project management plan. The work plan and schedule should be developed where they should identify all tasks, milestones, and deliverables by which progress can be measured and payments made throughout the contracting term. And then the budget justification should be where the proposer should submit a budget that explains the proposed allocation of funds for each of the tasks. And this section should provide also a narrative explanation of the expected cost and how the budget allocation supports accomplishment of the overall work plan. Next slide. Okay. And for qualifications, the proposer needs to provide a detailed response with how they plan to meet each of the minimum qualifications listed in the request for quotes, and to what extent, if any, the minimum qualifications have been exceeded. The personnel and team resume should list all key personnel, including the project manager, who will be working on the project, including their titles, a summary of similar work or studies, and a resume for each of the professionals within the team. And the proposer should also be creating a table that shows how the minimum qualifications are met with assigned key personnel to each category of the minimum qualifications listed. Lastly, for references, each proposer and subcontractor must provide one reference form. Each form asks for 3 references within the form with a brief description of the services provided, and at least one of the references must be a representative of a tribe attesting to experience supporting tribes with capacity building, technical assistance, and/or climate-related work. Next slide. The maximum amount of the grant should not exceed $500,000. And for the budget, the proposal should include a comprehensive budget that accounts for the cost of the entire grant length. And proposers should be submitting a detailed budget itemizing the proposed cost by tasks and staff hours attributed to each component. All proposals should include any and all anticipated costs for completion for the work plan, such as an identification of position titles funded, salary ranges, benefits, operating expenses, travel and per diem expenses, and any overhead or indirect costs as well, including subcontractors with the same type of cost details. Next slide, please. And this slide just details the attachments that are required. So any attachment with an asterisk next to it is required for the overall proposal. And I do want to highlight that this is a new attachment slide. So we had a request for quotes webinar a few months ago that didn't have this because we were still working on what the final proposal needed. So I do want to highlight that if you go to the Cal eProcure site, there should be a comment with an addenda with notes that states exactly what was changed. And the main change is that we actually removed some of the attachments that were listed previously to make the process a little more clear and a little more straightforward for what the proposer actually needs to submit that's applicable to the final proposal that we're needing. So I think if you check the Cal eProcure site previously, there might be some attachments that aren't indicated in the slide anymore. So feel free to just disregard those for now. This is the final attachment slide that we are going to base our scoring criteria on. Next slide. And lastly, the deadline for receipt of proposals is January 19, 2024 by exactly 5 p.m. Pacific time. And proposal submissions must be submitted electronically by email only and have the solicitation number in the subject line. They have to be submitted by email to this email address. So it's contracts@opr.california.gov. And this is also listed on that Cal eProcure site. And I do want to highlight that the date and time for the deadline by OPR is very strict. So 1 second past the deadline will deem the proposal as late and will unfortunately be rejected. Next slide. And with that, we could begin our question and answer section. So let me look through if we have any. So it doesn't look like there's any in the question and answer chat. Let me look through the chat function. And then I'll also give everyone a few minutes to think of any questions that they might have. And I can also always go back to any slides that need further clarification. Yes, so the question was, will this presentation be available later? The recording for this presentation will be posted on our webpage in the next week or so. I can drop the link to the webpage where it will be posted. Here. And I can also share the slides for the presentation to all the registrants as well. Okay, so it doesn't actually look like we have any questions. Feel free to also unmute yourselves. You can raise your hands. Definitely open, the floor is open for anyone, but it doesn't look like there's any in the Q&A section or the chat box. All right, doesn't seem like there's any more. Hopefully that means that the presentation was very straightforward and clear, so that might be a good sign. We can continue to stay on, but feel free to hop off if you don't have any more questions. The recording will be posted on the webpage, including any questions that are asked later on if there are any. So thank you all for joining this RFQ webinar. As always, if you have any questions, Mark, if you can move on to the next slide. Feel free to send any questions to this email address. So that's contracts@opr.ca.gov. But thank you all for your time and for your interest in the RFQ.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes, definitely. Feel free to ask any and all questions that you might have. We will be staying on until all questions are answered.
Okay, there we go. You guys can hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, awesome. I'm not sure how to. I'm not sure how to get. Oh, there we are. Hey, I'm here. Okay, great. So hi, my name is Mike Newland. I'm a staff archaeologist with ESA, and I work a lot on climate change issues. And I'm working with Federated Indians of Great Rancheria right now. And so I really apologize. I was actually on a tribal call before you guys launched this. Grayton just sent this to me like this morning, so I went and registered for it and got into it. So this grant or this process that we're doing right now. So this is for technical advisors applying to the program to assist tribes. Is that right?
Yeah,
And
so The pilot program right now has two separate funding tracks. There's the contracting track for 500,000 to the technical assistance provider. And then
Okay.
there's also the tribal grants that are separate.
Perfect. And so in this particular case, what we'd be looking at would be something like the tribe has a project that they need assistance on. We would come and request a $500,000 or whatever grant to assist the tribe in this project. And these are the funds that we're going to need for that. It's not like an outside technical assistant person just applying for a grant saying this could potentially help some tribe somewhere. The tribal project is sort of already got to be sort of established and underway and well defined, and we're just coming in to assist. Is that?
So a little yes and no. So the idea is for the technical assistance provider to work very closely with the 4 to 6 tribal grantees. So the TA provider will be responsible for providing any technical assistance or capacity building services that are requested by our tribal grantees. But it'll be a collaborative process where the TA provider will be selected prior to the tribal grantees and will be part of the process of helping them set up their first action plan, which is one of the tribal grantee deliverables, as well as assisting with any of the technical assistance services that you mentioned.
So are you guys then matching the TA with the appropriate tribe, or does that connection got to be established before either applies?
That's a good question. So this is the pilot program, so we are still trying to figure that out. But the idea is to have a lead technical assistance provider. And if there are any needs or requests that the tribal grantees are asking for, and let's say the lead TA provider does not have that expertise, we're hoping that any subcontractors under the TA provider will be able to assist those tribes directly.
Gotcha. So you were talking about, and I apologize for if these are dumb questions. I feel like that was a very critical 15 minutes that I was stuck on the phone. You guys, with the sheet side, the pages I saw was talking about a proposal. And so given that the project's really going to be dependent on what the tribe needs, what they're applying for, are we supplying you basically with rates and the kind of specialty services that we provide, or are we actually providing because if we're trying to scope something out, we don't know what we're scoping for yet, right? Because it's going to depend on what the tribe is looking for. So I don't want to make sure that I understand how the funding is, how we're to scope out a funding for a project that we're actually not going to be up to us to design necessarily. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that is a really good question. I wonder, Ina, do you have an answer for that?
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to jump in on that question. Thanks for the question. I think the way that this program is set up, we are looking for a contractor that is able to bring on a team of folks who have varied expertise, who could then be responsive to a number of different climate related issues. It's, the tribes won't necessarily be, it's not kind of everything under the sun, but things that are related to climate that they're wanting to work on, whether that be solar or prescribed burns or clean transportation. It could be a number of different things. So we are looking for a TA team that has pretty varied expertise and is able to kind of bring on some folks who have varied expertise. And then, the tribes themselves will kind of set, set what their goals are specifically. I think if there are certain things that the tribes are wanting support on that, really don't fall within the TA provider's expertise, we can also look to see if there are other ways for us to connect them to other technical assistance that's available to them. but that's kind of the idea for this. And so there is a scope of work that's included within the RFQ that we're looking for the TA team to respond to. So you wouldn't need to create your own scope of work.
Okay.
We have all of that information
Got it.
in there. Does
All
that
right.
help?
Yeah, it does. If you guys have a scope of work provided, that's something I could take back to my team and we could
Mhm.
focus on that. The flyer that was sent to me was more RFQ based, that we're gonna send you our quals, and then I saw the slides, and slides seemed very much proposal and specific project based, and you guys wanted the budgets for that. And I was just trying to sort out where we were in and where we fit into the process, so that I knew what to deliver to you guys.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would definitely recommend taking a look at what's included in terms of the scope. I think that will help quite a bit. And
Okay.
if there are additional questions, yeah, please feel free to follow up afterwards, or also, of course, if more questions come to you while we're
Okay.
on the call, feel free to ask them.
Okay. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for the questions.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. And I also dropped in the chat again the link for the request for quotes and our grant guidelines, which might be great resources for some of the questions you were just asking in case you
Great.
missed earlier. And I see Grace, you have your hand up.
Yes, hi, Grace with CivicWell. I was just kind of curious as to, I see that you guys have $1 million available, and you have, you're looking for 4 to 6 grants for tribal partners or tribal awardees, and you're assessing funds amounts between 150 and 250,000 for the 2-year term. And then looking below, you have a bunch of different, I'm on the tribal capacity building page by SGC, and I'm looking at those pieces. I'm just kind of curious as to what you all are, how you, not the allocation of $1 million, but how you reach, 4 to 6, and then those amounts. Because I'm really kind of, I'm thinking through how the award amounts might be leveraged by tribal communities. And dare I say, it might be challenging for some tribes at those amounts to do some of the big grand plans that they may want to reach for. So I'm just kind of curious as to, have you gotten any feedback about the amounts, and what were some of your thinking around those numbers?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So we originally started with actually a lower funding amount. I believe it was, or funding amount and range. We had $1 million total. So that was split between the tribal grantees and the TA provider contract. And then we held a pretty robust public comment period where we had a workshop series where we were trying to solicit feedback and input from tribes and tribal serving organizations. We sent out tribal consultation letters to tribes listed on the NAHC contact list, as well as held tribal consultation calls, went to in-person tribal events. So did a lot of robust outreach and engagement throughout the 90-day period, in addition to a lot of research upfront when we were designing and developing this pilot program. So we did get a lot of feedback that the funding amount wasn't enough, and we were able to increase, we were able to find more funding within another program, which allowed us to actually increase that funding range to what it is now. It's 150 to 250,000. And we did receive a lot of feedback that the original range was not enough to sustain a competitive staff for the 2-year grant term. And that this was a better range to be able to fund staff salaries, since that's the main purpose of the funding. And it is also the purpose of the pilot program as a capacity building program. So we are looking for tribes that simply just need funding to kind of get started on some of the climate plans that they already have. But at the end of the day, it is a pilot program. So we're hoping that if this pilot program is successful, we'll be able to receive more funding to fund more tribes with greater dollar amounts. But the funding range was also to think about what would be helpful, but also how many tribes we'd actually be able to fund within that 1 million. So we were thinking like 4 to 6 tribes with that 150 to 250,000 range would be a great start for a pilot program that would also allow a really probably a robust peer learning experience as well, since that is a primary part of the a primary component of the pilot program.
May I ask a follow-up question?
Yes, definitely.
I'm sure that the lessons from your tribal consultations are those available somewhere, or can you give me a sense of what tribal communities and tribes, are they looking primarily for planning support, or are there some that are looking for implementation support? Because I'm really curious as to any indication they shared with you.
Yeah, I think from the feedback we received, it seemed like it was a wide range of tribes needing planning and implementation support. But the idea of the pilot program started because we just kept hearing feedback from tribes that they just simply didn't have the capacity to respond to a lot of the consultation requests they were getting, and also to apply to the amount of grant funds that were available to them. So I think that was the foundation of the pilot program, was to just provide funding and technical assistance support to build that internal capacity, so tribes would be able to apply for that grant funding and apply for funding that would support the plans or implementation plans that they already had. And then in terms of notes, we don't have the notes from those consultation calls available publicly. I'm not sure if that's something that we would want to do. I will refer to Ina for that, because they were private calls between SGC and the tribe, but I'll let Ina take over on that one.
Yeah, thanks, Nancy, and thanks for the question, Grace. Yeah, I think, we wouldn't necessarily want to be sharing the notes from the private consultation calls that we had, but we do have our staff report that gives kind of an overview of the feedback that we heard throughout the engagement process that we went through. I think one thing I would also mention to your question around funding for planning versus implementation is that this program isn't exactly a planning grant or an implementation grant. It's a capacity building grant, and it's really meant to help tribes build some staff capacity to be applying for other grant programs. And so it's in some ways modeled off of some of our other capacity building programs, like the Boost program, that, are meant to help kind of provide a launching pad for communities to be able to access other dollars. And so the funding amount is really meant to be able to cover staff costs. We originally started out this program planning to provide just technical assistance, and we really heard from tribes that it was super important for us to be offering funding directly to them to be able to build staff capacity. And so the grant amounts are a little bit lower, but it's because they're not meant to be planning grants or implementation grants. They're really meant to build that staff capacity piece. And then hopefully that will help both with advancement of planning and implementation related work that tribes are looking to do.
All right, I see T's hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you. Please forgive me for missing so much of this. I was traveling internationally and I had intermittent connection. So I apologize for perhaps asking a question that's already, something that may have already been answered. What, in terms of the 109 federally recognized tribes in California, did you all say how many would really likely get funded?
Yeah, so because this is a pilot program, we are anticipating between 4 to 6 tribes being funded with the range of 150 to 250,000.
I thought I heard that, but I thought I was mistaken in what I'd heard. Like how would you possibly, would just be the most competitive thing that any of us would have ever done when you go from 109 to 4 to 6? And how it just seems like a vicious competition when you go from this large number of eligible entities to 4 to 6. I couldn't imagine what would give you the edge in getting a grant like this. So do you already kind of have some tribes in mind that you want to work with when you set this up?
I can jump in on this question. Thanks for asking. So we don't have specific tribes that we're planning on working with through the program. It is a program that we're trying to make the application process quite simple for. But I don't think we anticipate that every tribe in California is going to be applying for this program. We've certainly heard from folks that there's interest, and we hope that will be the case. But we haven't, received any indication that every tribe will be applying, certainly. I do think, with a smaller dollar amount, it is, it is, challenging that we aren't going to be able to offer more grants, and we would love to offer more grants if that were possible. But through all of the engagement that we've done thus far, we've really heard from tribes that it's very important to have a program like this, and that we're hoping that with this small dollar amount and being able to pilot this, that if we're able to demonstrate success, we can hopefully have more funding in the future. So yeah, it's definitely a good question. And I understand, some of the concern there. Obviously, we would love to be able to fund more tribes. But considering the fact that it is a pilot, we're hoping that this will be a good way to hopefully be able to provide more funding overall to tribes in the future moving forward.
Thank you.
Of course. Thanks for the question.
Are there any more questions from anyone? I'll give it a few more minutes to see.
I noticed that there are very few participants on this call. Do you know what might be responsible for that?
Well, I can just chime in. Thanks for asking that question as well. So we have this call is related to the request for quotes for technical assistance providers to support the tribal grantees that we end up having through the program. And so we did quite a bit of outreach on this webinar, but I think, we may have a smaller number of folks who are attending and interested in the TA RFQ. We also had a workshop last week for the tribal grantees. And I would say, I think we've done a lot of outreach, and I think we've been really excited to see the folks who are able to engage and who are interested in the program. But I think this is also the second one of our workshops that we're holding as well, so that may be part of it also.
Thank you.
Of course. Thanks for asking.
Okay, last call for any more questions before we end this webinar. Okay, it doesn't seem like there's any more, so just want to say my thanks again for taking the time to find out more about our request for quotes and your interest in the tribal capacity building pilot program. And this recording will be posted on our webpage within the week. If you have any more questions, feel free to always email us at the email listed on the slide. So that's contracts@opr.co.gov. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.